Is that the same out here? Because there are childcare spaces down there. Sorry?
Where do you see them?
It just pops up. I think that would, because everyone's in now.
Okay.
I think that you, yeah.
What
Yeah.
is it?
Yeah, okay.
Mr. James, we can ask him. James, that's front wire.
Okay, welcome everyone, and thanks for coming to this tour today. So myself, I don't think myself. It's coming from the.
It's coming from the. There you go.
So myself, Chris Maughan, and Theo are going to talk today. I'm going to talk first. We're both going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll open it out to questions. So 20 minutes each. But before I started, I just wanted to check in with everyone. I want to know who here has grown, processed, sold wheat products or grain products.
Alton.
Not eaten. Taking that as a breath. So have you grown, processed, or sold grain or wheat products? Grain products. I can't see the people online, but so that's helpful. And then second question: who here would like to see a change in the way that grain production and systems generally operate towards maybe a more sustainable or agroecological way of? Yes. Okay. So not Francis. If we would like to see a kind of change in the way that production happens. Yeah. Then final
Online people are raising their hands as well. Yes. Yes.
final question is, what confidence do you have that this is possible? So if you believe it's really possible to change towards an agroecological grain system, put your hand up.
Oh, it's possible. It's possible.
Likely.
It's possible.
So who thinks it's unlikely? Who thinks it's unlikely?
Likely after World War III.
Yeah. So a few people saying that I can't tell if there's serious comments about war. So anyway, that's helpful. So anyway,
Sorry, there's a second. Apparently, online people were not being able to hear us. If you mute, okay, that's a bit weird. Can you hear us now, the folks online? Can you hear us now?
Yes.
Yeah. Can you just like raise your hands because we can't really see you all?
No, but don't go off this because it.
Sorry. There's too many voices. Please,
Oh, I see.
one voice only speaking.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah,
very
don't worry.
difficult to understand. The microphone is not okay. Only one voice, please. Otherwise,
Yeah.
we cannot understand one word.
Okay, that's fine. I was just doing a straw poll, so it's not going to all be like that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, finally we
Okay.
can hear you. Yes.
So now we'll go into the talk proper. Okay. So thanks for that. So this
One
is
voice,
my
please.
talk.
Say it again. Can you hear us now?
Yes, it's better. If you keep one voice, please.
Maybe like that. Close, speak closer. Yeah.
Okay, so the title of my talk, you might notice actually it's two titles, and there's kind of a point to that. The first is a reflection of the stage of research that I'm at. So I'm kind of going into a new phase of research. So I'm kind of exploring different ideas. The second is that I'm kind of quite suspicious of a lot of these terms in the first title. So this was the title that we kind of had as a bit of a framing for our two talks. And maybe there's obvious reasons for that, but yeah, some of those ideas I'm suspicious of. So I kind of have this alternative title here. Why alternative grain isn't just different seeds, it's different worlds. And I last time I gave a talk here, actually it was 10 years ago, and that talk was about science fiction. So I thought I'd kind of start off from where I left off, and give you a quote from a science fiction story. So does anyone know what story this is from? Anyone recognise this quote?
Oh, it's not yours.
No, no.
No. This looks a bit like Mad Robson.
Who killed the Finns?
So it's from a story by Octavia Butler called The Parable of the Sower. So it's quite a kind of intense quote. I'm not sure I completely believe it, but I thought it was an interesting idea to kind of think with, and I'll circle back to this. And a lot of what I'm talking about today has to do with diversity. So I'll come back and hopefully explain why I've given you that quote at the end. So a quick overview of what I've got planned. So some background on grain systems and why I think they matter. And then a couple of kind of meditations on what it means to talk about alternatives and also what it means to talk about innovation generally, but also specifically kind of in grain systems. So I'm using grain systems to kind of think about those two terms. Then I'll talk more specifics about the UK alternative or regional grain movement and a project that's just about to start called the RISE project, and then offer some concluding remarks. So why are grains important? Well, what are grains? Would anyone like to give a definition?
Because they can't hear us all night.
Give us a definition, someone.
Seed of cereal, what? Not cereal.
It's the seed from a cereal.
So yeah, there's some ideas there, but not certainty. And does it really matter? So here's a working definition. So the seeds of cereals, but not all cereals, because my understanding is that cereals are the seeds of grasses, so oilseed, whereas there are other cereal-like seeds that are also grown in field systems and at kind of bulk quantities that are also kind of treated like cereals. So grains is a kind of, well, I use it as a kind of catch-all for all of those crops. And it's huge, you know, in terms of what in terms of our agricultural systems globally, it accounts for a massive area, a massive quantity, massive amount of energy that's kind of invested in this particular category of crops. And perhaps the most abundant is wheat. It's certainly by area, it's the kind of largest area. Leo is going to talk maybe more specifically about wheat. I'm talking more generally about grains, but I thought I would highlight that one. Wheat is also the biggest source of plant protein in the human diet. So I guess the point of this slide is to say it's significant. You know, this has a huge impact on our world. And I would actually go so far as to say they're the kind of center of a political, economic, cultural, and ecological catastrophe that's been unfolding for many hundreds of years, really, but that's intensified certainly in the last 100 years. And some of the kind of things that I would pull out from that catastrophe are the loss of diversity in that seed system. At the moment in the UK, about 7 varieties make up the majority of the area planted to wheat. So we've lost a lot of diversity. There used to be a lot more diversity. As a kind of indication of kind of context there, in the Genesis Plant Genetic Resources database, there are over 500,000 accessions of essentially different wheat varieties. It's not quite the same as different wheat varieties, but something in that ballpark at least, that is the kind of possible group of varieties that could be planted. you wouldn't want to do that. I'm just saying there's 4 or 5 orders of magnitude between the numbers of varieties that dominate our wheat system in the UK and the kind of possible high point. And that's a story that's played out across the seed system across the last century. You know, we're just seeing this massive filtering and loss of genetic diversity. And many of you will already know that, so I'm not going to linger too long on that. So we sometimes talk about this as genetic erosion, but there's also been the kind of institutional political erosion. Again, many of you will be familiar with this. The kind of this is data. This is the research was done by Philip Howard, looking at the kind of political economy of the seed industry. And the story is essentially concentration. You know, very few companies own all the seeds. Well, not all of them, but a majority of the seeds. And actually, the thing to note here as well is the link between those companies and the agrochemicals that are used to farm them. So he's got people like Bayer who are known for agrochemicals as well as seeds. So those two things go hand in hand. And the reason why I'm talking about that is because it makes it very difficult to influence. You know, when such power is concentrated, it makes it very difficult to influence and change that system, which is quite poignant for us and certainly for me in this project, because that's what it's about. It's about thinking about how we introduce alternative ways of doing and thinking. And alongside that, we've also got a kind of physical concentration in the supply chain. The infrastructure that makes up this food systems and specifically the grain system is just very concentrated. 4 mills account for 65% of the output of flour. And why is that problematic? Well, you know, for the same reasons as the democratic erosion, it's a kind of political point, but it's also, I think, quite a bad strategy to have all of your infrastructure very concentrated. If something goes wrong, something changes in that system, it's very difficult to adapt. And we saw that during COVID, that these big roller mills weren't able to adapt to the change in demand and change in supply. And I think the bigger point here for me is that we're producing seed in a particular way, and it reflects a particular way of thinking about the world. And this is a quote from Martin Prechtel, who writes a lot on indigenous seed systems, and he kind of sees these industrial seeds as having gone through a process of being deliberately tortured with our greeds and our needs into untenable competitive forms like ourselves. So I think there's a sense in which the seeds reflect the wider context of how we see the world and how we're kind of reshaping the world. And possibly the idea of the commodity is key in that, because it dislocates these seeds which have deep cultural, historical meaning, and puts them into an anonymous system of exchange. So what's the alternative? And again, under scare quotes, because I'm kind of a bit suspicious of that term, but let's continue nonetheless. So if I was to be pushed and really simplify it, I would say it's a system based around diversity. And I think historically that has been about plant diversity and kind of product diversity, which let's just take that for now, although I don't think that's enough, as my title suggests. And this response, which has been ongoing, I think, for over 50 years now, was essentially to this narrowing the genetic base. This isn't my area of expertise, so I'm aware that, this is kind of the mythology, so to speak, of this revival. So, and I know there's people online who know a lot more than me. So this is how I see it. So it really began, I think, or started again in Europe. The cultures there, France, Italy, Germany, have I think, a much more intact culture of working with grains and bread than we do in this country. So it's a little bit ahead of us. The revival of artisanal bakeries, the revival of sourdough, the revival of this idea of the paysan boulanger, which is a kind of essentially a farmer miller, you know, that where a lot of those processes were kind of integrated into one farm, and the bakery as well. And then the advent of small milling technology. So this is kind of more of the modern take. So this is an Astoria mill here, not in the 1980s, a little bit later, but that idea of trying to kind of rethink the types of technology, especially processing technology, that would be needed to revive this movement, kind of started around that time. So in the UK, it's a slightly different story. Starts a bit later, I would say. And really the story here is that it's coming back from the brink. That a lot of these varieties were essentially lost, and the ways of the knowledge that underpins the use of some of these varieties was also lost. So it was kind of about starting almost from nothing. And I say almost from nothing. I think John is actually on the call. So an honourable mention to John here for as someone that, as I understand it, was able to revive some varieties after he found some in a roof thatch, some medieval varieties, and able to bulk them up and bring them back into circulation. I think that was happening in the 1990s. There's the ORC weight to population, or YQ, which there's a slight connection to our centre here, because the person who was really behind that, I think, was Martin Wolf, and he was, I think, a member of staff here at some point. And the reason why I'm talking about that is because that was really filling a gulf, I think, a void that was left in the seed, in our kind of seed system, when a lot of the land races were lost. So he was essentially rebuilding genetic diversity by combining lots of modern varieties into a new population that had high diversity, but it was also tailored to this new demand for kind of high quality and highly diverse seeds from bakers. So the YQ stands for yield and quality, so it was balancing those two things. But essentially starting again because he had to, because the land races that he wanted to work with didn't exist anymore. At least that's how I understand. And then there's interesting story related to Andy Forbes and Andrew Whitley of so Andy Forbes of Brockley Bake and Andrew Whitley from Scotland the Bread, and they managed to recover a land race, or a sample of a land race called Hen Gymro, which is a Welsh variety, a Welsh land race. It's one of the latest to survive in the system. And really interesting story that there was some lines that were existing in, I think, the Aberystwyth seed bank, but he managed to find a variant of that in a Russian seed bank, the Vavilov gene bank, and bring that back to the UK. And now that is a really important variety in this kind of alternative grain movement. Really, really symbolically, but also functionally important. So it was kind of just a sense of how close we came to just completely losing all of these things. And there's a picture of Andrew receiving the seeds from the Vavilov gene bank in Russia. And then another key driver here was just consumer demand. It is a demand for something other than industrial bread. Really important factor, but sustained by fears over food security. So like having low genetic diversity and the lack of resilience that brings, but also the cultural erosion that comes with it, and also I think learning from other alternative food networks. So I think, you know, these networks have benefited from a much longer history of food system development at the local level. Don't know what that is, not filtering now, but this is and I think one of the things that really drew me to this movement was that it felt like a manifestation of this quote, which is, I think, maybe, does anyone recognize this quote? Maybe heard this idea before. You never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. Does anyone know who this is?
They're not over.
No. Buckminster Fuller. So a kind of controversial but visionary kind of utopian thinker. And I don't know if I fully 100% believe this, but I think that this network definitely embodies this idea that it's recognizing that the mainstream system is dysfunctional, it's obsolete, but what their response to that is just to create an alternative parallel to it. So what is it actually doing? What is it innovating, if you will take that term? And what is innovation? So I just think about it in this quite simple way. And this is actually Joseph Schumpeter, who's one of the kind of key thinkers of innovation in the 1950s, a capitalist, unashamedly, but someone who had a commitment to kind of seeing capitalism as a tool for change. So this is a cursory glance of the things that I've noticed in the UK system that are being done differently. First of all, just looking at this field, this is different. This is not what you normally see in a wheat field. And I've enjoyed the times where I've gone into fields with farmers, conventional farmers, and seen the kind of shock on their face to see fields like that, and then disbelief that you could actually get a yield out of that field. But allegedly you can. You might not get the optimum yield, but you'll always get kind of high yield. You'll get an acceptable yield. So there's different things being done in terms of how farmers are thinking about weeds, thinking about intercropping, those kind of things. There's different varieties being selected. You can see that here, but you can also see that happening here at Gothelney Farm. Really interesting trial happening there, led by Fred and Colin Gordon and Fred Price. 5,000 varieties being trialled and bulked up with input from farmers to try to find these varieties that will work in this system and reintroduce them into the supply chain. Amazing project. And some breeding, small amount of breeding going alongside that. Different processing. So you see things like this, mobile grain cleaners, mobile mills, that are also owned differently. They're owned sometimes in a kind of shared mode. So doing that differently. They're organizing differently and governing differently. Here's a irrelevant, well no, it's a picture of a sociocratic way of governing. It's not specific. I couldn't find one that's specific to this movement, although there are ones. There's lots of new ideas being brought in about how you actually govern diverse seed systems. That are different to the way you would govern low diversity systems. Different financing and different ways of kind of selling. I'm grouping those together here. This is a label that's been generated by one of the regional networks in the Southwest, the Southwest Grain Network. It's called True Southwest Flour. And it's a way to finance the network. So they're putting a levy on the network to generate a small amount of money. Doesn't really impact the price in a significant way, and it helps to increase the reach and the impact of the network. And then at the other end, at the consumer end, solidarity economics, so methods of paying it forward or paying differently according to income. They're all being, there's lots of experimentation going on about how that's integrated into these systems. And different campaigning and legislative strategies. This, I'm not exactly sure of the status of this at the moment, but there was a big push, a very successful campaign to get a special dispensation for heterogeneous materials, so populations, land races, that kind of thing, which are at the moment, they're illegal in this system. You can't actually sell that seed because it's not distinct, uniform, stable. It doesn't fit within the industrial paradigm. So lots going on. And then, yeah, so to come back to Schumpeter, a little bit more expansive way, he kind of saw innovation in this way, the kind of drive to kind of revolutionize the economic structure from within, incessantly destroying the old one, incessantly creating a new one, otherwise known as creative destruction, again, one of his terms. So you kind of see hope simultaneously how this is both interesting in terms of systems change, but also problematic because it comes right from the heart of capitalism. It comes right from the kind of mythology of what capitalism is. And we need to be aware of that. But I think it's still useful to think of it. So why hasn't, given all of this, why do we still see the bread that we see in the shops? Why do we see sourdough at £13 a loaf? Why don't we see a mainstream of this amazing thing? That I hope I'm giving a sense of like, I'm really blown away by this movement. It's so impressive and so inspiring. But we still see stuff like this. It remains niche. The cost of products have remained high. It's exclusionary. And it's very difficult to tell one from the other. Like you can see a sourdough loaf in a bougie artisanal bakery. How do you tell the difference between that and a loaf from one of the networks that I've been talking about that have these deep values? How do you do that? How do you look? Maybe that wheat field with lots of flowers in it is an exception, but most, even the like highly diverse wheat field, don't all look like that. And would the kind of casual observer be able to tell? Really, really difficult to say. And there's this kind of constant, associated with that. There's a constant danger of these ideas, this energy, this inspiration just being captured. I'm stolen this slide from someone else who gave a talk some years ago, but I just thought it was really interesting. Like, capitalism is also very good at kind of taking these ideas and like selling them back to us. So this is everywhere, right? Like it'll be in our cereal packets, the loaves of bread that we buy from the industrial system will try to tell us that this is what we're buying, when we're not. This is a controversial one. I'm not going to say much about this because I honestly don't know what the truth is, but this is an interesting project that started to try to, I think, harness some of this. It's received some criticism. It's really trying to mainstream the idea, and the criticism has been that maybe some compromises have been made along the way. I'm not going to say what I really think about this because honestly, it's so hard to tell. But it's, for me, a sign of how difficult this is, complicated. And then the kind of, are the tech solutions, the tech end, this like production, processing, genetic diversity, is that where we should really be focusing? Actually, some really interesting research that was done by NIAB, Nick Flagley at NIAB, showing that actually the trend, despite my alarmism earlier on, actually is moving towards diversity. So see, I don't know if you can kind of work out what this crazy graph is telling, but it's essentially showing a time series of the area devoted to each variety. So by the time you get to 2020, you've got many more varieties over the same land area. So you could say we're going in the right direction in terms of diversity. That's to say, I think that that's the kind of thing that the industrial system can actually understand and integrate. With the advent of AI, why couldn't you just have, industrial populations and land races with high diversity? Why not? It could happen. But it really begs the point, what is that actually what we want? Do we just want genetic diversity? I would say probably not. And to kind of understand this process a bit, I'm going back to this slide on the different types of innovation, and I laid them out like that deliberately because they go from the material to the informational. I don't know if anyone's familiar with Donella Meadows' work in terms of thinking about leverage points. A lot of these like material tech fixes, they're down here. So her idea was that there's ways of changing the system and they're all valid, but it's much easier to change the system up here. Processes, design, intent, big ideas. You change everyone's mind, very easily change the system. But there's a caveat there. It's really difficult to change everyone's mind. It's much easier to fiddle around with the parameters in a field and to change it there and do it successfully than it is to change everyone's minds and to change whole systems and how they operate and the things that drive them. So I'm not just saying, oh yeah, we should ignore those things. It's just being aware of those kind of higher order, you might say, ideas, legislation, finance, governing, organizing, they're done successfully, they will change the system, but doing them successfully is much harder, I would say, especially at a large scale. So coming back to some of these terms then, diversity, innovation, alternative. Because I haven't got loads of time, I mean, I just have 5 minutes. I put it down to this. It's diversity is not equal to plant genetics. We have to think about it in a much more expansive way. People, ways of working, organizing, our whole systems. It's what, for me, that's what agroecology offers to the conversation. It's not just thinking about what's going on in the field or in a material way, or even just in an ecological way. It's about thinking much more about what diversity means, who's participating, why. I'll come back a little bit more to that at the end. And innovation isn't just new products, which is kind of how Shunta really thought about it. You know, it was about innovations bringing a product successfully to a market. That's where I disagree with, or where I see that as a limited way of thinking. It's much more than that. It's about how we think, how we are in the world, and doing that in a much more diverse way. An alternative isn't just novelty. It's not just ancient grains on a cereal packet. It's genuinely thinking about what differences are and how they can leverage these deeper changes. So what do we propose to do about it? This is where I awkwardly transition into talking about this project. So we've got this project. It hasn't actually technically started yet because of an annoying, what do you call it, administrative thing. But it's 2 years. It's funded by Farming the Future. The main objective is to really think about how do we collectively across these regional networks catalyze transformational change in the UK grain system. And one of the key focuses for this is kind of the organizational, the governance level. Like I said, the kind of more leverage kind of end of Donna Meadows model, like not so much thinking about how we do material kind of technical changes to the system, but much more towards the kind of systemic end. And our key approach for that is to kind of recognise that we're really at a starting point in some ways on that, and forming what we're calling, and what we were asked to call by the funders, a community of practice. Who here is familiar with this idea, a community of practice? So seeing some nods. It's kind of a fancy way of saying like a peer group, but it does. I'd say it's more than that. Here's a quote to tease that out. So a community of practice is not merely a community of interest, because you know it might be mistaken for that. People who like certain kinds of movies, for instance. Members are practitioners who build a shared practice through sustained interaction around recurring problems. So it's really action orientated. It's periodical in that sense, iterative. It's about meeting regularly over a sustained period to really solve problems. And I like this Venn diagram here, because this would maybe be the community of practice, but it's suggestive of this kind of wider context that group of people are in service to. It's not in isolation. It's not a closed group. It's really outward looking, trying to think about how those solutions will move things on in those wider contexts. Domain and practice. Domain is kind of set of ideas, knowledge, practice, how people do things, and then the community, the people that belong to that or are affected by those two things, the domain and the practices. A little bit of the kind of summary of what's going on actually in the UK grain system. Another nod to Andy here. This map was compiled and sustained by him. So what do we know already about these movements? By my count, there's 12 regional grain networks in the UK, 10 of which are active, and those 10 are participating in this project. So we've got a good spread across the UK, good representation. A bit of a gap here in the north of England. Not quite sure what's going on there. hills. Yeah. It's not, that's a good point. Yeah, it's not historically known as a grain producing region. Maybe that's something.
Well, they all mentioned individual acres, didn't they?
So,
Complicated.
and there's other related organisations in that maybe don't fall into the regional grain network definition. So we've got the Nottingham Mill Co-op, we've got the Real Bread campaign. I haven't actually got Scotland Bread involved, but they're really important in this. What are the characteristics of it? This is the kind of letdown in some ways, where the air escapes from the balloon. So we're young. I think the oldest started in 2018, but really the recent kind of wave of activity is post-COVID. They're still small. Some have only 9 members. Some as much as 70, but it's got small financial turnover, small area in cultivation. But I think one of the strengths, and there's definitely limits to this, is participation, especially in the supply chain. It's a genuine mobilization of farmers, millers, and bakers. There are other people represented there, research, for example, civil society, consumers. A definite lack of local authority that needs to be addressed, I think, personally. But yeah, good gender split. It's a healthy movement that's mobilized. It's done probably the hardest thing, actually, is getting people mobilized. So that's to be celebrated. And there's a lot in common. I mean, I think there's an affinity across, which is important for a community of practice. A big emphasis on knowledge sharing. Like I said, this is about rebuilding almost the knowledge system from scratch. So it takes a while to get everyone on board. Focus on human connection, in-person events. Organic is really important across the board, and of course, seed diversity. These are the things that really draw us. This is the domain, I guess, of that we're talking about here. And because they're young, it's relatively informal. There are very few of those organisations that are legally constituted. That's something that we're focusing on. But the dedication and the connection between networks is really strong. I'm not going to. This is a terrible slide, but this is just a Gantt chart of the project. So you can see that the community of practice meetings across the top, the kind of brown meetings, they're kind of the spine, and then we've got a number of in-person events planned throughout that, so we can really start to kind of put these new ideas into practice. Because some of the things we'll be looking at are organizational forms, governance methods, heterodox economics, like thinking about how you integrate solidarity economics, how you integrate these different ways of raising money that aren't dependent on grant funding, and of course changes to legislation. Sorry, last but not least, membership diversity, because whilst there's good representation across the supply chain, there's not good representation of the UK as a whole. It's probably what you'd expect. It's very white middle class. That's really important to this movement to address that. So conclusion. Sorry, I've probably gone over a bit. So of course the terms are really important, but I'm not one for rejecting terms. I think I'm much more inclined to kind of reclaim, reshape terms to suit our purposes. So I think that's where I'm at the moment, and this talk's been really helpful for me thinking that through. In some ways, this is the headline for me, that diversified organisational structures and people and ways of seeing and being are as important as plant diversity or genetic diversity. It's really, and in fact, I see a relationship between those two things. They need to mirror each other, otherwise it's not going to work. This is where I try to come back to Butler, the Octavia Butler quote. So what I see in that quote, which seems to be quite dour, was that it's diversity isn't about tolerance for me. Diversity is a matter of life and death. It's about the active, often painful necessity of forging solidarity to survive societal collapse. It's diversify or die, basically, and that's true everywhere. But it's useful, I think. I found it really interesting to think about diverse seed in more than anything. And to think of our lost cultures as seed cultures, which have been erased. And then the final point is being strategic about it, which is why we've got a project. You know, that there are these challenges, but kind of referencing back again to the meadows, we need the time, the resources, and robust participation to actually make any headway against those massive, massive challenges. And I think that's it. Thank you very much.
We're having questions in the end, yeah?
Yeah.
So we can get.
I mean, while you change over, was there any clarifying? You need to do your slides, but you probably just do it.
I'll just have to rush a bit more so we can have more time for the questions in the.
Sorry for.
Yeah, it's all right. That's no problem. I'm just going to pass some books people here that I brought to the session because we thought there will be some some of our colleagues that are online were supposed to be here in person. So because we're going to be covering some different topics and stuff, then we don't have so much time to go around. I'll just circulate some of the books that are kind of guiding the research into the projects. I'll just pass this around. So you have a look on that. And then we can also have questions afterwards if you want to jump into that. So basically, we are going now to look. So the idea was that Chris we're going to kind of problematize the system so that we have this notion, what is the scenario, what kind of things are happening in the brain, and then Chris highlighted what kind of innovations are we trying to deal with that, what kind of technological inputs are we bringing to this problematic scenario that we have in doing. And partly of that answer that we're trying to do here at CAWR is with the development of the TERRA Project, which is basically advancing health-based solutions for agroecological wheat production. Basically, the topics that we're going to be covering in the presentation today is a very brief project overview. We're going to be looking into updates in the cropping systems, current scenarios. Chris already brought some of the numbers around, but I'll be focus a bit more into the wheat itself because it's the key crop from our project. We're going to be sharing some of the preliminary results that we have yielded so far. And of course, hoping to develop the phase 2 of our project, which will be the field work. Yeah, and you're going to understand why is that soon. So basically, the TERRA Project was founded in 2024 in Paris. And this basically has as an underlying idea, they were testing organic products, particularly focusing on silicon dioxide. And this product, this material is being tested across different disciplines. So we're testing materials from a physics perspective, applied in agronomy. We're responsible to do the agronomical trials, but also we have research colleagues doing trials with humans and in veterinary science as well. So it's a truly multidisciplinary research group, and we have different researchers doing focus target to each of these groups. And we, as in CAWR, do the agronomical trials. So the TERRA group is basically an international platform, very diverse into different countries across the world, which is really nice too. That always brings a different kind of worldview, a different way of working, but also integrating these people. So from a group, a research platform that is so very young, 2024, it's quite a lot, and that's really significant. And basically, that's why the books are there, because the whole hypothesis, the whole workload around the TERRA Project is related to exploring the agroecology, complex systems, plant science, biostimulants, and plant intelligence, and the role of these preparations into the agroecosystem. That's kind of the underlying bit, and that's why these books are now passing around there, so that can save us some discussion afterwards. This is the project webpage. It's live. You can get more information about the details about our funder, which is FMRC, which is making this whole work possible. They are online, and so you can have access. This is our webpage. You can get more information about that. With the I'll just give a brief numerical summary about the wheat cropping systems, yeah?
Nice.
So for example, we have Chris brought already 109 million tons produced of wheat. From these, we harvest an area around of 222 million hectares. It's a lot. Chris brought some numerical percentages before that. The global average yield is around 2.6 tons per hectare. Again, varying against like the system that you produce, the varieties that you grow. The wheat global trade value, 50 billion, the lowest margin. It's a huge margin. It's a powerful margin. And of course, we see who are the main producers: China, India, Russia, US, Pakistan, Ukraine, Canada, Australia. As we saw in the previous presentation, this has geopolitical implications. It's concentrated in this area. So that's why the problematization that Chris did so well and enlightened our thoughts on the necessity of reframing that. But we are going more pragmatic with that, because we're going to be talking about the experimentation and technology that might happen there. But in terms of the production of organic wheat in Europe, we see there's a general trend growing. And yeah, it's okay. I think I can show it here. It doesn't show that. Never mind. So we see that there's a positive trend growing in terms of thousands of tons since 2017, having as the biggest producers in terms of grain, France and Germany and Italy. And when we talk about flour, we have again France, Italy, then taking the second place in beneficiating the grant, and then Germany. But so we see again this reflection: who are the key players in Europe, and what's this division between the production of the grain and the flour. When we look specifically to the UK, we see that the organic cereals cover around 10% of the total area in the UK. And the UK imports around 50 to 80% of its total value. So we are completely reliant on the external production. And there's this interesting data showing here that actually the conversion growth is actually growing in England, and we have reached now an average of 6.6% covered area conversion if that trend keeps pushing, which could be considered like positive. And of course, a big shift into looking to the local production. This idea that Chris was just like bringing for us. And I have to come back here because each of these dots here, it's a farm in England. And we see that all the production regions are concentrated in this side of the country, in the east side of the country. And Ulrich just made a joke like maybe here we don't have so much because of the hills. Could be really. Ulrich, maybe you're right on that one as well. But we see there is a concentration here. And when we look into the size of these properties, when you look to the size of these properties, we see that that's also correlated. See that the properties that yield more than 500 acres are always in this area as well. So this kind of gives us a notion into kind of the setup of our production area. Well, but what is the story with these regions as well? The story with the region is that when we look to the average mean temperature and the wet conditions, we see that it is exactly in these corners of the country that we are experiencing the most difference and the most dramatic volumes of drought or too much rain, or even the temperature as we see here. And when we see the modules, we see there is a tendency of having higher probability of wet early seasons in the west of the country. And then when we look to the drought period, we see that actually towards the east, the tendency exactly in our production areas. So we're actually having that very big limitation towards our production. And with that notion of the scenario, with that notion about how the value and the limitations that we have in terms of technology, the project TERRA was set up. And basically we are doing agronomical experiments, testing these preparations in the first stage in the greenhouse conditions. And then we're testing 11 products. We're going to go into the details now. but with the hope that from these 11 products that we're testing, that we are going to at least get 2 or 3 to be tested in field condition. This is the a kind of an overlook into the activities. We have the core research team here working on site, but we also have the TERRA research team working online. And this has been very helpful because it's a lot of things to be done here, and this network between ourselves really helps to keep on track with what the activities. We have basically 5 working packages that are self-feeding in themselves in terms of what the tasks are and the deliverables. But now we look to the fun stuff. So the agronomical experiments we are running here at CAWR, we are testing all these mineral preparations. These are all mineral-based preparations. They are based on sulfur, silicon, phosphorus, magnesium, potassium, iron, calcium, and carbon, and plant-based carbon. And all of these were sourced from homeopathic pharmacy registered with the government of the UK. We are following a randomized block design with a double-blind experiment, so we don't know what the treatments are. We're just assessing it until we have run the statisticals. Then we will be knowing what kind of treatments have been the positive ones. So we have 11 treatments, 8 blocks. That gives us 8 real repetitions for the experiment. We're cultivating the spring wheat. And we finished already the harvesting. We are now going to do the plant tissue nutrient content now in the following months. So basically, this was what we did. We cleaned the seeds with the hypochlorite of sodium, and then after the seeds were cleaned, we sprayed 10 seeds per pot. Each pot was a 10-liter pot. And from that, we added 5 ml of the treatments into 900 ml of distilled water, and that volume, 100 ml, was applied to each of the pots. And this is cool, yeah, because what is guiding our protocol? This is all novel. This is all CAWR proposing all this application of these technologies in the field. Very few people have done that, and we are certainly the leads on that. Where's the thing? There you go. So you see, the phenological development of the wheat crop is very well known from ages now, and we have basically 6 main periods where the crop is most sensible to environmental stresses. Yeah, and particularly this phase here between the flowering, and the grain filling, is the most susceptible one for drought. And this is actually, if we get the droughts in this period, is where we have the most brokerage. Like that's where we lose our crops. So what we did, we stressed the plant in this very moment. This is the moment that we wanted to pressure the crop to the most. So we wanted to stress it with drought, with the temperature. We have monitored our temperature. We went over like 30 degrees inside of the greenhouse. So really putting like the worst conditions for that phase in there to see how much the plants would respond to these treatments. Because these treatments, they don't follow the logic of substitution inputs. They're brought to the systems as a therapeutic proposal. So they're positioned specifically in terms of the crop. They don't follow the input substitution approach. It's about positioning them in specific times of the crop. So we have stressed the plant the most in this time.
Oh, I think because you're on the pen.
Oh, there you go. So this is some highlights of the scene, so you can have an idea of how much we did. The experimental setup, big highlight to Herr Francis for the amazing help during the process. The blinding protocol of the process, how did we do that with the amazing support from our lab team here. Getting the preparations ready, coded everything, getting ready. It was the experiments were assessed every 15 days, which was a lot of work. And here are some pictures of like we apply the treatments. Other measurements. So we assessed number of leaves, the germination speed index, the tillering, the number of side slits, the chlorophyll content of the leaves, the plant height, we have assessed,
I think if you turn off the pen, it goes quicker.
how to do that?
Yeah, click on that, click on the pen.
Look at the pen. Let's see.
Yeah.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. So now we have harvested the environments, the experiment, the plant tissue is dry now. We have assessed the plant fresh biomass and the dry mass. We were able to calculate now the spike's growth rate. This is such a fiddly work that takes so much longer to do this kind of assessment, but like the broad information that it brings is quite important to understand. Now we reached this stage. Thanks so much for time that has been already doing some analysis. We have already the values from nitrogen and carbon, which is really important. And okay, preliminary results. So in terms of the number of side shoots and number of plant height, we see there is an overall trend of planting of these plants growing, but we also see that there is particularly three treatments that like have yielded less number of side shoots. So there is some treatments that are not being so positive, which is always good because hopefully then we'll have good ones coming from there. So some possible inferences in the number of side shoot emissions. We have also a kind of a trend into the number of leaves that didn't vary much, but when we start to look into the chlorophyll content, we see that how there is noticeable that at least 4 treatments are really peaking in terms of the chlorophyll content, which is really exciting because when we see the next results related to the stem diameter and to the number of spikes, we see that those are the same treatments. So that tells us that treatment is triggering a response, a morphophysiological response into the plants, and she's producing more tillers, she's growing more and producing more chlorophyll. That gives us an answer about the machinery, the physiological machinery of these plants. So this gives us an interesting perspective here. The fresh biomass, we see again the same treatments kind of yielding again. These 2 treatments are yielding the not so positive results. Hopefully they're the controls, but even if they're not, like, well, let's see what comes around. And in terms of the dry biomass, we kind of have a steady line in terms of what they have accumulated. So these are the agronomical trials. This is the bit that has been concluded now. What's happening next? Starting in January, we're going to have starting the growing chamber experiments. We're going to keep the seeds in accelerated aging stress, always having in mind this chaotic scenario that might happen into the production area. So the idea is that we're going to be accelerating the aging tests for the seeds, and we're going to be running this series of germination trials. 3 of them we're going to run, so that we can have a proper comparison between the impact into the germination of these seeds and the seedlings. And these kinds of it overlaps with the work from Chris and then what the phase 2 of the TERRA project. Because as we were saying, the idea now, we're testing 11 products. The hope is that we are going to have at least 2 to be tested in the field conditions. And that's why this network is really important, because now we have to contact farmers and partners that will be interested to support us in this next phase. And the idea is that we're going to be bringing the best treatments to field conditions to see if that performance still is maintained into the field conditions. So that's what will be the next phase of the project. And basically, to advance this topic in general, we need this collaboration into a multidisciplinary approach. We need some more opportunities into education and training to this topic. We see that like the use of these preparations are not like widespread and well known actually. So we need more training in that, because as any other technical method, you need to be trained on that so you can use it properly and actually have positive results. There's the need for more network in the multi-sector, as we're trying to do now with Chris and our colleagues now. And of course, promoting dialogue spaces. I here have a quote from Professor Paulo Freire and his Pedagogy of Hopes. And he brings this idea that dialogue spaces helps broadening views and perceptions, improves communication throughout meaningful interconnections held in a space of care, solidarity, and respect. So that's what we're trying to achieve here as well. I leave here some references that we use for the research and for this presentation, and we can stop it now.
Great.
Yeah. stop sharing the presentation so we can see everyone. Stop recording. Stop recording.
I think you need to go to more.
Three.
Yes.